Hey friends, welcome back to the Inorganic Podcast. My name's Christian Hassold. I'm your co-host. My partner in crime, Ayelet, is off for this episode. She's at a conference in LA and doing some deal making. And actually, it's been such a crazy couple of weeks for both of us. There's a lot going on. This episode is like raw and uncut. I'm literally recording it and posting it. There's no bumpers because my editors have the bumpers, and I just wanted to get an episode out because there's so much to talk about that's happening in SaaS and tech M&A that I'm like, I got to just get it out. And in fact, I've probably recorded this episode 3 times so far. So this is recording number 4. I hope this one passes and gets out the door. And since there is no bumper, I'll just put in the disclaimer of everything that I talk about and say on this episode is representative of my own opinions and not that of anybody that I work for or any sponsor with which I'm affiliated. It's just my own opinions, and you should take them with a grain of salt and a very old copper penny. So with that, we'll get into the topics for this episode. I went to the KPMG M&A and Tech Conference last week in Silicon Valley with a gaggle of deal makers from all across the tech ecosystem. And there was some really interesting learnings from that conference. So I'll share a few of those learnings in this episode. I will also give a brief market update on M&A activity in enterprise B2B SaaS. There's a couple of interesting things to talk about happening in terms of deal activity. And the conferences always are inspiring in some ways. You go to the conference thinking you'll learn something from a speaker, or there'll be like some connection that you'll make that will be new and interesting. I always find I have these aha moments like I had in college when I was in history class or in intellectual property law, where the lecture set my mind off on a whole nother rabbit hole. And so I had 2 things that happened at this conference around M&A FOMO and earnouts that I'll stitch into the content of this episode. So that's the overlay of where we're going to go here for the next 30 minutes. Let me start with just a little bit more information about the context of the KPMG conference. So, KPMG, Deloitte, Bain, all of these guys make a ton of money on all things M&A. For those who are not familiar with their practices, they advise on integrations, they advise on strategy, they advise on market competition and sort of where you should be and where you shouldn't be. It's a very big part of their business. And so they all put on conferences. This particular conference was the Technology M&A Conference, and it very much had a tech bent to it. It made a lot of sense that it was at the Rosewood Hotel in Silicon Valley. The topics kind of spanned a few different points, and I'm not going to cover all of that content here because it'd be too much. And to be frank, sometimes these conferences are like trying to sort of cover all the things, but I'm just interested in sort of the very few things. I would say it was a great conference. I'm really glad I went and very grateful to KPMG for inviting me. So let me just give you a sample of some of the sessions that inform the content that I'm sharing with you on this episode. There was a session led by Lucinda Guthrie, who's the head of merger market at Ion Analytics. She talked about 2025 tech sector M&A deal dynamics. So we'll talk about deal dynamics in this episode. Another one was the AI investment landscape. This was a totally fascinating panel. I'm really sort of tired of talking about AI, but you can't get away from it because it's such an important part of this time. That panel had Paga Ibrahimi from FPV Ventures. It had Chris Kaufman from General Catalyst. It had Suchi Rana from White Space Intelligence, which is a division of ServiceNow. And that was moderated by Katie Roof from The Information. I love reporters from The Information, so I love having them moderate panels. The only other panel moderator that I love more than The Information moderators, Jessica Lesson and the like, is Kara Swisher. Kara Swisher, if I would have the opportunity to be on a stage with you, like it would be a life-changing event. She is such an awesome interviewer, and she's just got such a great expansive knowledge. Anyway, I was being a fanboy there. There was a crypto and blockchain panel with Akil Ipso, who's the head of corporate development at Coinbase. And I had an interesting exchange with him that I may or may not be able to get into. They talked about the autonomous economy. The panel that we landed on, the last panel before we went into dinner and happy hour, was Deal Structures Sparking Innovation, which is absolutely a session title made up by something in marketing. But cool. Matthew Gemello from Oric, a law firm that does a lot of M&A work, was on the panel. Andrew Modeleski, managing director of Morgan Stanley M&A, was on. Ted Shelton, who is an AI strategist and previously the COO of Inflection AI, which was acquired by Microsoft. He was a really interesting panelist as well. And that was moderated by Anush Balal, who's a strategy practice leader for KPMG US. So that's just a sampling of the sessions. I think you probably find it on the internet. I'll leave the link for the sessions in the show notes. So that's kind of coverage of the content of the conference. Now let's get into the meta highlights. Like, what are the big learnings, the big things that kind of came out of the conference? Number one, AI's pervasive influence on everything in tech and M&A. It's not really a surprise that it's having such an impact on the sector. I find it, I have a lot of due diligence calls with investors. So my day job is running M&A for a marketing agency. And my side hustle is I advise software advisors on M&A, principally in commerce and tech and a little bit of SaaS B2B. And almost every single diligence call that I participate in is, how will this company be disrupted by AI? How will this technology be disrupted by AI? How will AI positively influence this particular asset? And this is a regular feature of those conversations, and it's not going to be ending anytime soon. It's a justified question to be asking. One of the software investors that I was speaking with, Boston-based 2 weeks ago, said, there's an entire stack of software that probably took 2 or 3 years to build 10 years ago that you can build in like a quarter now. Because of the advancements in AI and software development. So it's fair, but there's also a lot of, it's not just building a great product. It's having great GTM and developing a moat, and, whether it's network effect or whether it's, getting pipes built into your clients so they can't walk away from you. There's a lot of other things that go into building a resilient software company. So AI definitely can present risks, but it also can't necessarily solve, go to market execution and things like that. Another meta insight was favorable market dynamics. The financial market's strong. The regulatory environment's opened up. Lena Khan is not in charge of the FTC anymore, so there's a lot more deals that are starting to happen, and we'll look at deal activity shortly. There's also a mention about peer pressure between competitors and competitor CEOs to start getting into deal-making mode and doing deals. We'll cover a little bit more of that here. And then the last meta insight is a talent and tech war. Not surprisingly, in this era, needing the talent that can live in the current world and be great leaders in the current world, AI-forward leaders and AI-forward talent, and getting the tech that can help accelerate and act as offense or defense in your growth strategy. So this is like the big meta insights that came out of the conversations in the various panels. I did mention there was a conversation about cryptocurrency and Coinbase. And, I'm not an expert by any measure on the market, but I did ask Akil during the session, like, about the TAM opportunity for Coinbase. And what I meant by my question was, like, crypto investing is still kind of niche in a way. There's like N% of people who have an actively managed crypto portfolio. You can't buy crypto on Charles Schwab. You can't buy it on Chase. You can kind of get peripheral products that have access to the market, but it's still not mainstream yet. It's not mainstream as a payment type. It's not mainstream as a currency. It's not mainstream as a mode of investing. So, what are the ways that a Coinbase could significantly expand its TAM, meaning the number of customers that would be leveraging Coinbase and its many different platforms. And his response to me was, number one, around payments and using payments, more accessibility around payments. And his second answer was kind of brushing on the idea that, I don't know whether it was him or was one of the other panelists talking about, Coinbase could buy a bank, like a regional bank or something, and get into the banking business. And, they could theoretically use that as a mode and a method for expanding TAM. Now people could have a bank account with cash in it and crypto in it and trade between the two. My thinking is that Coinbase probably should be seriously thinking about a joint venture with a large bank, like a Bank of America, a Chase, or a Santander, or something like that, where you can have your Coinbase account attached to your regular bank account and have a kind of a swifter movement of funds between the two. We know how Jamie Dimon feels about crypto, so it's probably not going to be Chase that would do that kind of a JV or that kind of a deal, but some bank probably would. I mean, at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who are in crypto because they're worried about the stability of the dollar, and they're worried about people tracing their funds or following their funds around and thinking about fiat currencies. So wouldn't it be a great way to mutually attract customers on both ends? So that was kind of a rabbit hole conversation that doesn't necessarily fit into this content, but it was one session where I was fairly engaged from an M&A perspective and where Coinbase was headed. And they're a very active investor and acquirer, not surprisingly. So let's get into topic one, which was the AI investing landscape. The way I want to address the AI investing landscape in this episode is really talking about the future potential impact on strategic M&A specifically. This is more of like cautionary notes for my peers in the M&A universe about what is happening in AI investing right now. And this panel had 5 to 8 minutes of stuff that was really the most impactful part of the conversation. So the first things that we're observing in AI investing amongst VCs is large rounds with no governance rights, meaning no board seats. I'm putting in 20, 30, $50 million into a company that's AI forward, and I'm not getting governance or board rights. Okay, that's a flag. The second is around economics. A lot of, there was a term they said was, my AI engineer is not an accountant. And they were saying that in the context of accounting treatment in these AI companies is very creative sometimes. As an example, a pilot contract for 3 months at $50,000 was being treated as ARR, even though under traditional accounting, that would not be treated as ARR, it'd be treated as a zero, if anything. Or talking about treating user revenue that is monthly and treating that as ARR. So if I sign up for ChatGPT at $20 a month on the monthly plan, and I can terminate at any time, is that what percentage of that aggregated $20 is really ARR? And companies are talking about saying one user a day times 365 is basically ARR. And there's a lot of loose accounting around it. And in general, that the AI frenzy is causing some investors, not all, I'm sure, but some investors to be skipping the numbers. And this is in an interesting time where a few different conversations, including short investing around AI and AI tech, have been happening in the last couple of weeks. Is how fluffy are the numbers underlying these businesses? And the other kind of insight from the panel was talking about there's just a significant amount of competition to get in on these early companies, to have a seat at the table. And I'll show some examples of that happening with real corporates and strategics right now, whereby they're throwing in $1 million, $2 million, or $3 million just to have a front row seat, just to be investing in these businesses, again, without all the diligence. And so what that means for us as M&A practitioners is when you're starting to think about diversification of your capabilities with AI product or AI tech, and you're picking up or looking at a venture-backed firm, a venture-backed business that has a respectable sponsor backing it. And I won't name names to throw shade at them, but imagine a really prominent VC has backed X, Y, or Z startup, and they had to move quickly to get in. They needed to have advantage, and their view of the world was, we're going to do 20 of these deals and maybe 4 or 5 will work out. That was their math. Well, you're now, as the strategic acquirer, looking at the 15 that are probably best off being strategically acquired. And the flag is that don't be so sure that governance or that financial diligence took place before the funding landed in their box. And you're going to probably have to account for either one of two things: making a bet and continuing to look over weird accounting, or spending time on Q of E and earnings diligence to make sure that what you're digging into is what you think is under the covers. So that was the kind of the learnings from that panel and insights. It's just so fascinating. Like 1 hour conversation about, how VCs and early stage investors are tripping over one another for every single business. The other thing that occurred to me as this conversation was happening is I've been looking at AI businesses for a variety of reasons, mostly out of curiosity. Maybe there would be an interesting startup tuck-in for a digital agency with a tech platform. If you're an AI forward business, or you're an AI kind of labeled business, and you don't have material investor backing, there's probably a reason for that. And that probably presents a value opportunity. Some great talent, some good tech, but wasn't good enough to get the attention of the big boys and girls in the valley. You don't have to price for froth in those scenarios. So I think there's a lot of has and has nots, and some of us as strategic acquirers who are more value oriented, the has nots may be just right for what you're looking for. So that's the AI investing landscape cover. Let's move over to the next panel: deal structures sparking innovation. What a great title. Kudos to whomever at KPMG came up with the title for that session. There were like 3 insights from this panel discussion, and one is going to qualify for the rabbit hole category. And as you know, if you listen to my podcast, I love rabbit holes. So there's one rabbit hole in this readout. I'll do the summary first. The summary learnings from the panel are, number one, the operator's dilemma, which is operators facing a challenging environment where new AI inventions can quickly disrupt existing ideas, creating uncertainty about the window of opportunity, despite the positive funding environment for AI. What does all that mean? Like, I need to invest in doing it myself, or I need to invest in acquiring it. Like that, my dilemma is kind of one of those things. And I could be disrupted. So if I could, or what I'm doing could be disrupted in a quarter after building this thing for 10 years, what are my options for defensibility or offensive competitive plays? That was sort of feature number one of the conversation of how that works. And that is going to lead into a rabbit hole. The other insight was around the valuation gap and the urgency to get deals done in this environment where there is urgency around deal making. We are in a place where we're still, a lot of the businesses that may be interesting for M&A right now were funded in 2019, 2020, and 2021, which is an environment where we all know that in some sectors, valuations were astronomically out of the norm. Marketing tech, commerce, all benefited greatly from the heightened valuations of that era. The sellers in that era have not really gotten over those valuations. And in some cases, it's completely not advantageous to mess around with the cap tables. The cap table dynamics are specifically challenging, which leads to a lot of conversations with investors about structures that essentially go around and put money into the founder's hands rather than the investor's hands. So there's a little bit of conversation of that. And that leads into creative deal structures, which is, although everybody prefers really simple deal structures, the practical reality is in an environment where valuations are inflated or expectations are high, deal structures just have to get very creative. And you can expect a 60 to 90 day deal process getting extended by another 60 to 90 days, just trying to agree on, negotiate, and paper a very creative deal structure. One audience member pointed out as a part of this conversation a significant increase in asks for warrants, and a warrant is essentially an option that turns into a value of stock currency, in a scenario where a certain strike price is met. I won't go in the rabbit hole on it. And most of you would know what a warrant is, but in simple terms, let's just say that you are looking for some consideration, but the buyer or the seller has a particular value they want, and there's a valuation gap to bridge, and the buyer is like, well, we don't really want to pay much more, but it's like, well, what about warrants as a way to say, well, if we believe that the outcome could be 2x what the current share price is now, will you give us another allotment of warrants at this strike price? So, we can win if you win. That's probably an oversimplification of the exact conversation, but a particularly interesting sidebar. So let me go back into the rabbit hole around the operator's dilemma. So what is the operator's dilemma? If you're a CEO of a company that should be doing M&A, you are probably like, hey, well, let me say it this way. This would normally be edited. Let me say it again this way. Let's say you're the CEO of a company and you have choices to build or buy, or you have choices to hire, to invest in talent, or to go acquire that talent. And you're thinking, a lot of my competitors are using M&A as a lever to solve those problems and go faster. And so I think I should be doing that. So I'm either going to hire someone for M&A, or I'm going to go have my M&A guy or gal go do that work. The discussion around the panels and in the hallways is around CEOs saying like, look, I'm missing out. I need to be doing M&A. The impact of that is a significant increase in corporate development jobs. I get my LinkedIn sort of flag for corporate development roles all the time. It never turns itself off. But right now, there's like dozens of corporate development roles just coming through my email box. So we know that there is an environment where a lot of companies are hiring for corporate development, which is one bit of evidence. Deal-making activity is also heightened, and we'll talk about that in a moment. After I get through this section, we'll talk about deal-making activity. That's on the rise, that's on the increase. And so there's just a lot of FOMO around what to do. And the one creative learning that came to mind as I was sitting in that session and I was listening specifically to Ted Shelton talk. Ted Shelton talked about M&A in such a clear way. It was just so clear and clean and simple. And I'm around a lot of CEOs that talk about M&A, and when you're in the room and they're saying they want to do it, they're so clean and clear. But then when you bring them the deals, they're like, well, is it right? And what about this? And what about that? It gets super, super complicated. So I have this theory that 90% of CEOs overthink M&A. And the 10% that really get it and really understand it tend to oversimplify what is typically a really complex consideration. What are the problems you should be solving with M&A? You can either buy X product or you can build X product. How do you go faster? What makes the most sense? You should have a clear thesis on whether you should buy or build. If you're acquiring a company because you just want a product to take to your channel, like that's another play. Maybe you have a market that they can sell into, a cross-sell thesis. That's another approach. Getting X talent versus spending the next 2 to 3 quarters hiring. If you have to go hire really attractive, really hard to get talent in a market, like there's plenty of talent in the entry level and the less experienced category, but the very experienced and the very qualified talent, there's a talent war for. We just talked about that. And so if you want to go faster, acquiring talent is a path to doing that without having to spend a lot of resources, time, and money hiring. And it has the same level of accuracy. I mean, hiring 10 new people and will those 10 people work out is about the same as acquiring 10 people. You just have a little bit more control at the upfront in terms of the incentives you put in front of them. Usually you're acquiring some revenue with it as well. So this all led into an interesting question that I found an answer to in some survey data that is buried in a KPMG report around what are corporates prioritizing for M&A right now. So if you're listening to me on Apple or Spotify, you won't see this screen share. So I'll just read it out to you. This is a report from KPMG on the directional differences between what a corporate looks for in M&A and what private equity is looking for. This is a sample N of 248, so it's probably a little bit below statistically significant, but it's a decent sample, 248. This is in 2023. I don't think it's changed much. The corporates are prioritizing enabling growth in their core business, which is usually acquiring or accelerating product. Diversification of product or services, again, acquiring product to diversify their portfolio. And third is acquiring technology. These to me are all very related and all aligned to what I was talking about, buying X product versus building, taking X product to market through our channel. Those kind of all fall in this category. Notably, the PE priorities are acquiring talent, which PE companies sometimes have a harder time acquiring talent because they, it's like a lot of people want to be a part of an exciting startup or, world's leading engineer solving today's problems, and private equity-backed companies are usually a little bit more mature. And so getting kind of really high quality talent can be a real solid play to up-level team and people. Growing into an adjacent or non-core business area, again, TAM and SAM expansion, and then geopolitical landscape. I don't have a perfect translation of what that is, but I think it might have a little bit to do with, diversification of the geopolitics of where your business might be operating. So if you look at those priorities, you say, okay, this is how corporates are typically thinking. Well, let's look at actual examples of what great CEOs are doing with M&A. So I have 3 favorite companies that I look at when I talk about sort of best in class M&A. Mark Benioff, of course, is the first at Salesforce. So let me get my other window open here. This is data courtesy of PitchBook. So I'm going to do 3 companies here: Salesforce, Atlassian, and Amplitude. And I'm doing that because Salesforce is like 200 billion, Atlassian is like 20 billion, and Amplitude is, I think, roughly $1 billion in market cap. And so this is a sample across market caps of M&A and investing activity of these companies. Now, Salesforce is wildly acquisitive, and they've done, I think, nearly 24 investments and or acquisitions in the last year. I'll just give you a sampling of a few that they've done. Again, I'm showing a PitchBook page here for those of you that are listening, but I'll give you the readout. So they just announced one November 13th. This just showed up. Doti, developer of enterprise search platform designed to provide contextual queries and instant answers tailored for business teams. Spindle AI, developer of proprietary AI agents designed to improve business analytics and scenario planning. And then Apromore, developer of open source process mining and AI-driven business process improvement. Those 3 don't have deal sizes, and those are typically because they're smaller deals. Salesforce did invest in Echelon. Echelon, interestingly, has had several corporates get into its book. I'll double click on that in a moment. So Echelon is an investment through the VC arm. Regrello, developer of supply chain workflow tools. Wally, a developer of no-code platform intended to convert text into SQL. Bluebirds, Ellipsis, Convergence, which is also an AI play. So you can see stitched here in the history is making bets in and around AI or making investments in AI, plus kind of some bolt-on of capability. This is very clear, super large corporation acquiring tech and talent, or getting an AI bump up at the front. So that's a Salesforce example. Atlassian, $39 billion market cap. I think I said 20, so I was slightly off there. $39 billion market cap. Their acquisitions over the last year, they've done about 5. The browser company was the most significant at $610 million. It's a developer of a browser designed to keep users focused, organized, and in control. That's clearly a product acquisition to accelerate something they felt they needed to do within their own platform. And this is a world where I think is a question about, the browsers that we've been used to today. There might be, like, depending on your context, you might have a hyper specialized browser. So that, I think, is probably a part of their thesis. Atlassian is also in Echelon, alongside Salesforce. And just for kicks, we'll double click on Echelon for a minute and look at their investors, which include Anthropic, Bain, Meta, PagerDuty, and ServiceNow. Basically, these are the who's who of heavily active investor and strategics. So that's kind of an example of a frenzy of strategics wanting to get a seat at the table of a company that's not going to exit, but is going to be doing cool stuff. And they want to have an opportunity to stay close to them through an investment. And it was a $4.75 million investment round. So you can imagine, like, I would love to be a fly on the wall for like how much diligence was done in Echelon. And that is not to throw shade at Echelon. It's just sort of like, was that a sprint to get in and to be at that table? $1 billion acquisition of DX, a developer of an insights platform designed to help developers do their work efficiently. Cycle, which was a developer of an all-in-one horizontal platform to assist teams in shipping products people need. And Borneo, a developer of artificial intelligence native data security risk remediation. So you can see a couple of AI, you see AI in terms of M&A and AI in terms of investment in the Atlassian portfolio. The last company, strategic, Spencer Skates. Anytime you want to come on the podcast, please come on. I love the way you approach M&A and how you think about it. This is a smaller market cap business, but they have a really cool platform around users, usability, and user journey. They acquired Command AI in October of 2024, and they just acquired Craftful, a developer of artificial intelligence-based Copilot platform intended to offer digital interfaces to make easy-use smart home devices. And that is an acquisition where a purchase price is not out in the public. So you can, probably more in the tuck-in category. And Spencer Skates said something recently about, a little bit about the AI frenzy. And one of the things that he had said around M&A, and this is about, the 10% of CEOs that understand, product M&A, he observed that there's an incredible number of startups trying to solve, the AIO, GEO era of how do you make sure your website, your platform, wherever you are, is AIO or GEO friendly. That's AI search or agentic search friendly. And there's, like all these different players that I've seen in the last, couple of quarters emerging that are like, we're going to solve this problem for this category of business, this category of business. Spencer said right now, he's not going to try and do M&A in that category because he thinks that they can build it just as fast. Like it's more of a workflow problem and not an automation problem. And investors are thinking anything AI for workflow is probably not really valuable as automation. So that is some specific examples of how I think top 10% CEOs are approaching M&A for all the right reasons and not overthinking it, not making it really complicated. I've got a problem to solve. I'm going to go solve it and I'm going to get a deal done. And it's kind of a dream state for an M&A leader to have a CEO that just has that level of clarity of what they want to do and what they don't want to do. So just one more thing to cover off before we wrap up this episode. Let's just talk at the highest order about deal activity in the market. I mentioned, deal activity earlier as kind of one of the features of the conference, but I have some data to share with you. Again, thanks to our friends at Pitchbook. There's some really useful data here. I'm sharing it on screen, but for my audio listeners, the first thing is enterprise SaaS corporate M&A activity by quarter. We can see over the last 6 quarters is on the rise with nearly 100 billion in deal value and an estimated deal count of about 150 deals, which is only, best compared to Q1 2024 and Q3 2023. So deals, again, evidence of deals on the rise. There's another piece of data in this report that was really interesting. Let me skip ahead to it. And that is, it's in this other report. So another angle of the view is North American M&A activity. We're also seeing deal value on the rise, and we're also seeing deal count on the rise. And hang on to this thought about deal value on the rise. There's one other part of this report that I wanted to highlight. It is multiples. So multiples from 24 to 2025 on a trailing basis are up about about half 0.5, so 7.9x deal multiple average in 2024, 8.4 deal average in 2025. B2B M&A EV multiples, the multiple revenue, are maintained at about 1.2x, although again, it's just slightly up in 2025. So something really important to mention around this data is the earnout componentry. This is one other thing that came up at the conference that I think is an important stick here. So we see deal count rising, we see deal values rising. How are these deals getting done? Let's go back to another report that came up at the KPMG conference that someone just raised their hand and said and referred to this report, and there are all these reports on the internet, but they don't all see the light of day because we have content overload. This is one that will go in the show notes. It's really fascinating to me in that from 2020 to 2024, the earnout size, the average, as in the percent of maximum earnout divided by upfront purchase price, has increased 5% from 25% to 30% in 2024. So earnouts are an increasing value component of a deal. And the second thing is that earnout size in smaller deals is very significant. So in deals that are 50 million or less, earnouts are about 47% of consideration, upfront consideration. And in the 50 to 100 million category, they're about 31%. And then it declines for the 100 and 250 million to 19%, and so on. So I'm seeing this on a lot of deals that I'm working on, both in my day job and in my advisory work. So it was kind of neat to sort of see this documented. You can see that principally earnouts are tied to revenue and profitability. This report has a lot of other details about specific components. I won't get into it for the purposes of brevity on this episode, but one other piece of data in there is, okay, so if there are a lot of earnouts, like, are they getting paid out? And the observation of this study is that 59% of earnouts are paid out partially or in full, and the aggregate maximum earnout paid is at 21%. So this is like really directionally important. You know, if you have an earnout in a deal structure, it should absolutely be for the purpose of the earnout being achieved. I think what happens sometimes is the expectations of the seller are really outsized, and the acquirer, the buyer, is just doing everything they can to make up the valuation gap. I'd bet that if you did a survey and said, okay, for all the deals where you felt like the earnout was right sized, what was the achievement level versus if you felt like the earnout was really a stretch just to accommodate that of the seller, what was that meeting point? So I think there's probably another layer of research here, which is when you're really just trying to meet a valuation gap and not get too crazy, you get closer to achieving earnout versus a situation where you really have to stretch the earnout. So this report, which is from Kirkland and Ellis, will also be in the show notes. This is going to be a show notes rich episode. There's like 3 different references here. In any event, I've covered a lot of territory in this episode. I hope the readout from KPMG and the earnouts data and the deal data was valuable and helpful to you. As always, please share your comments on YouTube or hit us up on LinkedIn if you have any feedback on the content we share on the Inorganic podcast. Otherwise, like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I'd like to get to 1,000 followers on YouTube by the end of this year. We're at about 750. I'm very excited about that. So thank you so much for all of the support from this community. Until the next time, I will see you. Take care.